You're going to get glimpses of how freeing it feels. Today, we're going to talk about building up self-trust by changing your perspective, deliberately choosing how you want to hold the experiences in your life, what happens to you, even your own thoughts. We have control over this, and stepping into that agency about ourselves is the fastest way to start building trust in ourselves. So the first barrier to this is actually realizing and believing that you can choose how you want to feel. We may have been brought up to believe or taken in the idea that our perspectives just are. They are what they are. There's nothing we can do about it. Our feelings are our feelings. We believe what we believe. There's nothing we can do. So the first step in overcoming this barrier is looking for evidence that this isn't actually true. First of all, I want to suggest that you think about all the people who think differently than you, the people that frustrate you, the people that you think are just plain wrong. They are living their lives with a perspective that is completely different than yours, and they're getting along just fine. They may be operating with inaccurate information, in fact. They may be misled. They may have taken in the wrong information, or somebody's influenced them in a way that they could be just dead wrong, and they are still operating with this information, with this perspective, and doing pretty well. There's a whole range of ways of seeing the world. There's a whole range of feelings about things that the way that you feel right now, the perspective that you have, is not the only one. In fact, your perspective and your feelings can actually change pretty quickly. It can change in the course of a day. It can change over weeks and months, or over a lifetime. You know, we have new experiences, we get new information, and this affects how we feel about things, how we see the world, how we feel. Whatever our perspective is shifting all the time. I'm inviting you into the belief that you actually can change your perspective and change your feelings and change what you think on purpose. And that is the first step to changing how you feel. When something happens to you, you're not stuck with the first reaction or the first feeling that you have. You can actually take a minute, step back, and decide if that's actually how you want to hold it. You know, somebody may have the classic example of someone is cut you off in traffic. There's all kinds of things that could explain what happened, and how you feel in that circumstance really depends on how you decide to hold what happens to you. And you can choose to hold the perspective that just feels better. It feels better to believe that somebody didn't intend to harm you. It feels better to think that maybe you just don't know the answer. Maybe you don't know what happened. You don't have any way of knowing, so you may as well not be mad about it. You can intentionally step in to a belief and a perspective that is more easeful for you, that doesn't wear you out, that doesn't make you feel crummy and low and bitter and grumpy the rest of the day. So if you're on board with me so far, here are 3 things that you really need to be aware of when you are stepping into this work. You're actually building new neural pathways in your head when you're making these choices to hold things differently, to see things differently, to adopt a different perspective. The first thing I want you to do is to be really kind and gentle with yourself, because you're going to be tired when you're starting a shift like this. When you're trying to do something different and new, your brain is going to be tired. You might need extra naps. You might want to eat really well. You might want to just give yourself a break and allow yourself to stare out into space. Your brain is working really hard when you're doing this work. The second thing I want you to be aware of is that it may be uncomfortable. You have years and years and years of conditioning that tells you that it's safer to hold that initial reaction, hold that initial perspective, that defensive stance perhaps. There's a part of us that feels like we need to be protected and we need to watch out for ourselves. So when things happen that we don't understand, the automatic response is often to protect. So when you're letting that go, when you're opening that up, it's going to feel uncomfortable for a little bit. It's going to feel a little risky. It's going to feel like you're letting go of being vigilant, and therefore you might feel a little vulnerable. And the answer to this is to really think about, are you actually vulnerable? Are you actually in danger? These sometimes are some very old conditioning that make us feel like we need to be like this. Just taking a pause and taking a second to actually assess whether this is true or not. And the other thing I want you to know about doing this work is that you will get glimpses of how great it could be. You're going to get glimpses of how freeing it feels when you let go of these immediate reactions and these perspectives that aren't actually making you feel good. When you take that baby step in and you start adopting that perspective or choosing the feeling that feels better, in that example we gave before about when someone cuts you off in traffic, just choosing to believe that it wasn't personal feels so much better. It feels expansive and freeing. And so that feeling is going to be there, and it may come and go at first. You may not be able to hold on to it, even though it's delicious and it feels good and you want to. You just need to expect that it's going to grow over time. You're building up a muscle that you didn't have before. So enjoy those glimpses. They're going to get more and more, they're going to get longer and longer, and you're going to be able to hold them longer as you practice this. So I want to address things that may be coming up for you at this point. We all have these reasons why we can't do this, right? And one way to address this is looking at the worst case scenario and seeing if we can handle it or not. The first reason that people often will say they can't stop being vigilant or they don't want to just change what they think or believe is that they don't want to be embarrassed that they were wrong. For example, let's say you don't get invited to something and you could choose the perspective that these people are mean and they're excluding you and that's the end and they're just terrible friends now. So the worst case scenario, let's say that's true, that your friends don't want to be friends with you anymore. They didn't invite you because they don't like you anymore. The worst case scenario is something that you will live through. It's not going to kill you. As much as it might hurt or feel bad, it's not going to kill you. You will live through it. And you will not waste time feeling crummy before you actually know whether you should feel crummy or not. People worry that they'll just be wrong, that they have the wrong information, but oftentimes there's no way to get the right information until the right information presents itself. So holding a state of mind that feels better in the meantime keeps you from wasting time and feeling crummy. You are somebody who will probably be able to adapt to new information. This happens to us all the time. We think one thing and we find out that that's not true and we adapt. And you can do that too. Even when you are choosing a perspective that feels better for you, when you get new information, you're completely capable of absorbing that information and adapting and changing your perspective then. Wouldn't you rather just sit with a perspective that feels good, and when different information presents itself, then adapt, then take it in and use that information to form a new perspective? And another reason people are afraid to stop being vigilant and holding those very defensive, uncomfortable perspectives that don't make us feel good is that they don't want to be insensitive. They don't want to have missed a vibe or something that somebody else was intending that they didn't outright say. This can lead to a lot of anxiety for people when we're trying to interpret what we think somebody meant by something that they did, but they're not saying it outright. Taking the perspective that everything's fine between us unless somebody tells us outright it isn't is going to feel a lot better than the alternatives, which would be being a little bit needy and wanting to kind of get reassurance all the time, or being hypervigilant in a relationship and not trusting it. The way to handle this worst case scenario is, yes, what if you did miss the vibe? What if they did mean for you to catch the drift and you didn't? You know what? On one hand, this puts the responsibility back on them for communicating clearly, which is where it belongs, and you always have the alternative and the option to apologize. If you did something that hurt somebody, you can apologize, you can make amends, you can set the connection straight again, but you didn't waste time having a perspective that felt bad to you for no good reason. So when you choose how you want to feel, you're choosing a perspective that feels good to you, knowing that you will always be able to change your perspective later if you get more information, or if you are mistaken, or if you miss something. You will always be able to change your perspective. Then, instead of suffering ahead of time needlessly and choosing a perspective that feels bad for you, why not just choose the perspective that feels most expansive, most free, most settled, and most grounded, instead of rushing to a resolution, instead of rushing to think you understand something that isn't completely clear. This sometimes requires us to sit in the unknown. There may be things, and there are often things in life that we don't totally understand, we don't see the whole picture of, and we can still choose to take a perspective that helps us feel better, that feels as good as we can feel every day, every hour, until we have reason not to. There's going to be plenty of reasons, I'm sure, to not feel good. So why not choose how you want to feel now and know that you can adapt later. The next video that you should watch is about the 5 everyday things you can do to build up your self-trust. This gives you some things that you can do on a daily basis that will help you build up that trust in yourself so that you really feel it and feel grounded in it. So go watch that video, and I will see you next time. I'm Annie Kipp. Bye-bye.